but what would happen is I'd try and please people. Inside, I'd have this like annoyance, like if people had annoyed me, but I thought, you know, and in the end, of course, it would end up with me falling out with people because I say now, somebody said to me the other day, I love the phrase, and I said, just change your audience. And if you need to, change the cast members, because that just, for me, was massive, that I just wasn't around the people that were my, you know, people.
Where does your love of learning and teaching, where does that come from? Is that something that's always been, because obviously that's something that you do, you know, with a passion, and obviously now you help develop people to do that. Where's that come from?
Well, when I don't know, maybe I've always wanted, my mum said that I'd always wanted to help people. So when we thought about what I would do, you know, when you're younger and they sort of say what you want to do, I wanted to be a physiotherapist. I don't really know why. I don't know. I was a gymnast. I don't know. And then I thought maybe, I don't know, nursing or something. And then school, in all honesty, when I look back at it now, was just, I was there.
Yeah.
That was it. I just did it, really. I just did what I was supposed to. I wasn't particularly good, as in I wasn't particularly academic, but I wasn't terrible, really. I just was there, really. And I did my GCSEs. I did okay in them, which not that anybody was surprised at. It was just like, oh, what are you going to do now then? So I did A levels and didn't do particularly well in those. And then just went on and did lots of other stuff and sort of then did a degree. And all of this time, it was like, oh, each time. And then I just decided then I'd worked in social care, which is what I'd done. And when I lived in the States for a bit, that was probably my first go at teaching type thing. Because there was a lad that was there, because the school I went to, it was Mormon area, and it was very small school, and they had a lad that was there, and his behaviour, they would have seen was quite strange. He couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't do anything. And then I decided to work with him, and I taught him to read and write while I was there in that time. Yeah. And then when I left, they'd all changed their attitude towards him, and they went and got him help and everything. And so, yeah, then I just sort of studied, and then within my work then I was asked if I wanted to deliver some training for a foster care company, and at the time I thought, oh, actually maybe I could look at taking that further. So I then did a PGCE, so I was nearly 28 then, I think 29, and did that with a view to train carers, because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to train people and do the things that I'd done. So I did that, had a baby. That didn't go down well with the council. and then really then I just sort of carried on doing lots of other jobs to fit around the children. And then I fell into teacher training and I loved it. So I've been doing that freelance, but I've now stepped out and I'm doing it on my own now, which is, I love it.
That's an incredible journey. And it's amazing, isn't it? That the individual that you helped very early on in your career, and obviously you're very early on in you know, their education, those to change the mindset of people that of actually this individual is, I don't know, troublesome, or this individual is, you know, not listening, or whatever it is that, you know, the connotations that put to that that young child. And it's amazing how just nurturing and looking at things differently and listening and has changed that perception, and that will then go with that child to be able to help.
Yeah, I mean, he was, at the time, I just remember I was there at the time, and then he was jumping around the room. I mean, he was 18 at the time, 17 maybe. Okay. Just, it turned out I had cerebral palsy, and his dad was a vicar, and they'd moved around, and literally nobody had ever, which is just bizarre. I mean, we think things in this country aren't great, but I mean, this was sort of a lot of years ago when I was 18, so a lot of years ago. But yeah, it was crazy. And for me, I was like, I had to do something about it, just within me, to just change that. And they did. And it was wonderful, because they said it had changed their way of looking at things. So.
talking about changing things, okay, I'm going to jump straight into the when we spoke and we said, what can we talk about? Because I was saying there's so much that we can talk about, you know, the work that you're doing. And you said to me that your diagnosis 2.5 years ago, so 2.5 years ago, allowed you to transform your life. Can we, because I feel there's so many things that we can kind of pick on what you've said, you know, previously, but it's, and you mentioned about transforming life. Can you tell us how that transformed your life?
Well, it was all quite by accident. The whole thing was quite by accident. I'd never even considered. I used to work with children that had ADHD. I feel ashamed to say this now. I worked with young people. I worked in children's homes as well. And I never, ever, I think my brothers likely got it, but I never even considered that adults have it. And I never considered girls have it, which I don't think many people did. And so, yeah, I don't really know. I'd always been a very busy person. I've always done a lot of stuff, charity work, doing things for people, but I don't sleep. I don't have an off switch. So, and that was one of the things for me. And I remember reading something one day, and I read through and I thought, that kind of looks like me, a lot of those things there. And then I don't really know. I know with my husband's work, we looked into it actually, and then they said that they would pay for me to be to have an assessment. So I was very, very lucky, because they said it would have taken years and years. And so yeah, I was very fortunate. Within a few weeks I've got the diagnosis. I just explained everything. I was like, whoa, it was like I know many people. Someone this week that I taught came to me at the end of one of the sessions and said, I was diagnosed last week, and she said, this has just blown my mind. You've talked about this. She felt quite upset about it because of the life that all those years that had been lost. And I did momentarily, and then I'm quite an impatient person. So I was like, anyway, let's just go on with life. Because I looked back and I think I used to fall out with people. I was an angry person. I was still the same person, but there was always this like rage inside of me with just getting annoyed with things all the time, people, falling out of people. But as soon as I got that diagnosis, I was like, I know what brain I'm dealing with now. And I'm proud to say, actually, I saw it as a way to then use what I knew to change what was to follow, if you see what I mean. And it literally has. The people that don't know me before say, I can't imagine what you were like. But other people say to me, people that have known me from maybe years and years ago, just said, you know, I feel so much more positive because I've changed. I was a people pleaser. I thought I used to like people, but I'm actually a people pleaser.
Which is a real common, I don't know if that's correct terminology, but a common thing and a common trait within this. You know, when we look at neurodiversity as a whole, neurodiversity as a whole, when the people pleasing side of it is, for me, that's something that I've battled with forever.
I've realised that, but what would happen is I try and please people. Inside, I'd have this like annoyance. Like if people had annoyed me, but I thought, and in the end, of course, it would end up with me falling out with people because I say now, somebody said to me the other day, I love the phrase, and I said, just change your audience. And if you need to, change the cast members, because that just, for me, was massive, that I just wasn't around the people that were my, people.
That's really interesting when you say about the. I love that analogy, by the way, and it's very true. But it is, isn't it? I guess if we're trying to serve the wrong people, I guess if we look at it, then it's very difficult, isn't it? Because you're never going to live up to that expectation, for yourself and for the people that you're around.
They don't. I think I used to feel that I'd put myself around people and I'd moan about them, or I'd be critical, and I'd think I didn't like myself for it. I really didn't like myself. But I was sort of stuck, if you see what I mean, because I wanted everyone to like me, but consequently, it just had the opposite effect. Whereas now, because I just don't, and it's not about wanting people to only put myself around people that like me as such, but it's my type people, or people that they don't have to like me necessarily, but just they were just completely the wrong people before. and just the difference in it is just wonderful now for me, that I just feel at peace with.
Is that
myself.
kind of like an acceptance of?
Yeah, I love myself now, and I don't mean for that to sound big-headed, but I spent you know, a whole lifetime of people saying you're too much, you're too sensitive, you're too this, you're too that, you're too the other, and you sort of sit there and you think, maybe I ought to change myself, and you think, well, I don't really want to change myself, actually, I'm quite happy. And you sort of live with this sense of not feeling liked by people, but if you asked anybody what they thought of me, they say, oh, she's really lovely. So you sort of think, what's going on here? But of course, then once I found out, I thought, I get it.
But isn't it exhausting, though, to try and live up to that expectations of what everyone else is thinking? So we're talking kind of pre-diagnosis and pre-understanding, you know, how you kind of, you know, you saw the world, and that expectation of continuously, it must just be exhausting.
Yeah, well, just this constantly. I say overthinking, and I don't like to use that now. I don't use that now, but yeah, it is. It's just constantly worrying. Then when I found out about what rejection sensitivity dysphoria was, I was like, oh my gosh, this is why my relationships have never worked. This is why, like, I've hounded these men to death in the past, you know. And actually, I've had conversations with previous partners and said, and we're like, oh my gosh, I understand it. And they've then looked at themselves to see that, you know, if you've got someone that's trying to ignore their stuff and you've got someone that's trying to hound you, that's never going to work. It's never going to work. Whereas now I try and have a bit of a word with myself. If I think somebody's, I don't know, ignoring me or annoyed with me, I'll have a word with myself and go, do you actually think they are, really? Do you really think they are? Or do you think it might be their stuff going on? Because a lot of the time it's not mine, it's actually their stuff.
When did you get to that stage? Because that's even just making that little statement that you just mentioned, that's still a very tough thing to do, isn't it? Especially if you're within that moment, to then think to yourself, when you've got all these emotions going through and you think to yourself, you know, are they really upset with me or are they not? To kind of take yourself out of that situation and do those. Is that something that is, because I'd say that is a skill. Like you've clearly been able to develop to be able to do this.
Part of it is my work. Part of it is, and I'm not going to go into it because it's like, is Maslow's hierarchy, which talks about what needs people have to be able to be, well, it talks about it in all different senses. But in terms of when I'm teaching, it's about, you know, all the things that you can do for your people that you're teaching, you know, to make them flourish. But actually this works in that real life. So it's all the things you need. So whether you're hungry, if you're thirsty, if you don't feel safe, all of these things, it goes up and up. And so actually, when I even look at my son, you know, he's 15, nearly 16, you know, hormones, you know, everything's like, oh, you know, and so you'll ask him how are you, and he'll snap your head off. It's not about me, it's about his stuff, you know. And it's the whole, somebody did something to me a while ago, and ordinarily I know it was to do with, I had asked them to an event, and in the end it didn't come off. So then they saw a picture of it on social media, you know, that usual stuff. And she sort of was a bit upset with me over it. And the usual me would have gone, for God's sake, you know, all this. And I just stepped back and I said, I'm really sorry you feel like that. I said, I didn't mean to upset you. I said, to be quite honest, what you saw in the pictures wasn't what it was. I said, I had a bad back still. I'd come in late, blah, 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 blah. And I said, but it was because I knew it was about her stuff, because it was her. I knew it was. So I tried to actually turn it round. And I can't remember what I said to her in the end. I said something like, she was talking about social media being rubbish. And I said, to be quite honest, it can be. I said, but if you just have your people in your circle and your people in your life that you know don't have it perfect, this kind of stuff, that actually when you share things with those people or you see those things, you don't have that jealousy or anything else. And you just, now I don't have anybody around me, or if I have to, because I have to sometimes, I'm self-employed out of choice because I know that I wouldn't be good in certain situations. But I now don't put myself around people where I know that I'm going to be triggered like that, or I just have my time with them, and then I go and put it in a box over there and I move on. And it just, for me, it's been huge that I don't feel angry now, and I just feel so much more positive about life.
See, that's incredible. It's inspiring to hear. It's interesting. I remember someone saying it's you find out who you're really connected with when you share good news to them, and how they react to this. So if you're you've got a group of friends or whatever it is on a social channel or a group message, and you send them, I've done this today, this and this, and the response is, is it a jealous response? Is it I don't care response? And that circle that you associate. I would have been one of those negative people because, sorry, there's a dog involved. I would have been one of those jealous people but it wasn't, for me, it would have been because actually I can't fake being happy or whatever about someone else. So, we're on social media when people all sort of flock to people when they've done well with something or not even particularly well nowadays, in some circles. I can't do that. If I don't feel it 100%, I just can't do it. So I'd have that choice of either not and looking bitter or saying something and it wasn't genuine. So now, really, when I celebrate people, I'm absolutely because I'm really want to, and I don't have to fake that. Do you think we that's a great topic, actually. Do you think that's something that we've become more accustomed to of celebrating success? And then what is success? I mean, my success is different to someone else's success, but that kind of putting something out there, hoping to get that, acceptance, I guess. Do you think we've tipped the other way? I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't share success. That's, we need to be feeling good, but it's on what angle that we put this out, because we also then, if we're talking about rejective people that feel that when you get that rejection, if we're putting something out and we're doing it on the wrong meaning, that could cause more damage than good. Are you looking for a social media company that hits the sweet spot? Then please do check out our sponsors, Sweet Social Media, who do incredible work from online training to in-person training to running and managing your social media marketing to get you seen by many, many more businesses. If you comment below Sweet Social Media, you will get a 15% discount on one of their packages. Please do check them out, and thank you so much for being our sponsors.
It's really funny you say it, because I don't. Part of my business has taken a long time to grow. I've now recruited somebody in to help me. Graham's helping me because I really, really struggle with. I've got an issue with arrogance, and I've got an issue with feeling like if I celebrated my stuff, and it comes back from being at school when I was a gymnast, and I remember somebody saying once, I'd been in the newspaper, which isn't what you want when you're at secondary school. And I remember someone saying, she's a show off, isn't she? And one of my teachers said, yes, she is. I'm anything but that. Like literally, I'm anything but. And I think it stuck with me for a long time. And so now I find it really hard I don't celebrate. I don't like, it's not about not celebrating me. So with my work, I'm no different, no better. I don't think anybody's any better than anybody else. But for me, when I'm trying to market my business, I suppose it's about me showing what I can help other people achieve, because that really is about what I do. It's not just bums on seats. It's not just, because it really isn't. Which is why when I market myself, it's about marketing me and what I do for those people. But I think there is so much out there, and I'm able to step away. Even sometimes I look at social media and I have to come away from it because it's like so much noise everywhere, so much noise. And I sit there sometimes and I think, oh God, I'm not all of that. And then I think, but you were pleased with what you did this week. Someone told me that I'd inspired them with something. They just had a diagnosis and I hadn't known. She came up to me, and little did I know she was diagnosed last week. And she said, I can't thank you enough. And the email she sent me made me cry. And I thought, stop worrying about everyone else. Just, but and I think that's my biggest advice to people is just be you. Like for me, that's the biggest thing was this, which is that I accept that it's okay. I don't do things, the way that everybody else does, but also literally just be yourself. Somebody I helped with a while ago with something, they go to conferences and they were saying, I've got to do this presentation. And I said, okay, well, I helped them with that side of it. And I went, do you know what? Just be you. I said, just literally be you. I said, because And he said that's what's massively helped, is that people, the feedback he'd had, the sector he works in is quite corporate and quite staid. And I said, oh, sod it, just be yourself. And he said, oh, you'd rock up in your pink, wouldn't you? Because it's my favourite colour. And I was like, yeah, no, I wear what I want, I do what I want, and I don't apologise.
That element of expectation, I guess, of trying to live up to other people. When you first go into an industry, for instance, you think to yourself, you start thinking, who's the lead? Say lead player, probably not the right words, but
yeah.
Okay, who's the lead player?
Right.
Yeah, who's the lead player in this? What organizations really kind of doing? Who's the movers and shakers, and who's the voice within all this? And then you think to yourself, well, okay, so I'm here. I'm at this point of the journey. But people don't realize that is such a beautiful stage to be at. It's stressful, don't get me wrong, and it's full of anxiety and everything else. But it's such a beautiful stage, because you've almost got this clean slate, in the sense that people, the people that are around you, and you find the right people, and Marianne, you've mentioned that as well, will naturally want to support you. And I think that's just brilliant, because what you don't understand, or people sometimes don't understand, is when you get then to that level of these people have got a voice and thousands of people waiting on what they say, or however that looks and this stuff. But that sometimes is really tricky, because you have that expectation that you don't have to live up to.
Yeah, well, yeah. There's this idea of, I think there is this idea of perfection, and it's ironic that I'm having this conversation with you now about that, because just yesterday, and there's times I slip back, and just recently I feel like I get myself into situations and I think, oh hell, here you go. And it was to do with, I run a network with somebody, and it's quite hard to get your name to be heard, really. And within the care sector, I found it quite difficult, because there's movers and shakers, and I don't, despite the fact I've got quite a big voice, a lot of people would say, I also haven't, because I'm not very good at, I'm just like, look, I do what I do, and if I'm good at it and you think I'm good at it. I was offered some work a while ago by somebody that met me by chance, that asked to speak to me again and said, I want you to do this for me. And I'm like, why me? You could go and get anyone. He said, because I met you and it's you that I want. And so I find it weird and quite hard, as you said, when you've got all these big people that do. And I think when people are trying to shout their way to the top and trying to, because you got to a certain degree, but that's not my way. And I think that me doing the teacher training that I do is, when you said about the stage, that ironically, I teach people from all different sectors. This week, I've had people that work in care. I've had people that, I've had the head of security for the BBC there. I've had people that, all sorts of people. And I then have to inspire them to go and inspire other people, like that ripple effect. And I think for me, my business then took off in terms of what I wanted, because it wasn't where I was going to go with it at all, was because I looked and I thought, I can use, because I found that what I was doing got better because I started being me. I then now teach other people, obviously the skills of it, but my biggest thing is I say to them, and as I left them the other day, I said, just go and do you, because you've got that knowledge, you've got that experience, and trying to act and be something else is, and I think a lot of businesses that I see a lot of people come in and they say, oh, I've been told I have to do it this way and that way. And I go, no, you don't. I said, who are those people to tell you? They're people that don't know how to do it anyway. So yeah, I kind of do disrupt things a bit.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, it's using, I think people try and fit what they think they should be. And I see it all the time, and I'm sure you see it all the time. And that's quite an act.
It's a hard act to continue being someone you're not. That's I find the most difficult. And I guess
the media's kind of gone two ways now. I think there is this, be yourself. And I think the more that people talk about neurodiversity, I think the more, whilst people say, oh, everybody's got it now. And I say, well, if everybody has, why isn't the world a little bit more friendly towards us? But and there's the other side of it, which is this very corporate, very, but as I have people in my training that then say to me, oh, we're told we have to do it this way. And I say to them, what does professional mean? And people go, And I say, well, it's whatever But actually, you get people say, if you had a group of managers, you have to behave in a certain way. I said, maybe those managers don't want to behave that certain way. Have you asked them? I gauge when I'm in a room with people, I gauge how they want it. And in real life, I do that. And actually, a lot of the time, people want to be more ADHD like. They want to be, but it's like there isn't this permission given. And I'm like, if I give permission to people to be themselves, then
it's breaking down those barriers, isn't it? We join an organization, no matter how great the organization is, there's the handbook, the employer handbook, and you have the guidance on this and the policy on this and policy on that, and what you need to do and how you conform and how you're at the meeting and when do you speak at the meeting and all these different rules and things that you pick up, and the subtle cues, even if they're not in a hefty handbook. Now I get it. All businesses need structures and rules, and even our own businesses,
I love them, yeah.
We have them in that sense. But from a social point of view and from a personal point of view, not being yourself in that organization is masking a lot, and it can become, and I guess it's probably why a lot of organizations have big turnover of staff, because they think to themselves, well, I'm just exhausted being this other person in this organization and not being able to express myself in a certain way.
It's funny because when I look back at my career, oh my goodness, how many jobs I had. And of course, it all makes sense now. I've just done, we're just going to be doing some training, or we have done up in Leeds for carers. And it's about the care sector looking at the fact they've got such high turnover in staff. But actually, when you start looking at it, and again, I see it within the work that I do, that within the care sector, there's a high turnover of staff. And it isn't surprising, therefore, that a lot of people are neurodiverse. The same as with the military, a lot of people are neurodiverse. I've worked in prisons. It's not surprising then when you go and look back that a lot of the prisoners are neurodiverse because of all the behaviours that come with it, and the not doing very well at school, they're not achieving, and then the subsequent effects, there. But it's, when I look back at all the jobs I'd had, and I know that for me it was because I got bored really quickly. And they'd say, if you wanted to go into a senior position, they'd say, you've got to be a year. And I'm like, oh, I'm not doing that. Because I knew I could do the job. And I think that what's happening now is that sector's having to look to say, we're going to lose people here. And actually, there isn't a big pool of people to choose from. There isn't a big pool. And actually, if somebody can show that they can do that, let them. Let them. Don't have this silly rule if you've got to be here a year. If they can do it and they can prove that they can, let them. Because, for me, it was just this constant, I'm bored now. I'd see a year ahead of me and think, oh, life.
A long time. Like a year sometimes in a workplace where you're thinking, actually, I need to just get through the day.
Well, so it's self-employed because it just doesn't work.
I remember those different rules back in the early days when it seems like a couple of lifetimes ago, when I was kind of working my way up the retail career, and I started pushing trolleys 12 hours a week and always wanted to be a supervisor at one of the supermarkets. And I always remember trying to get onto the management program, and they were saying, you needed A levels, and you needed to go to university, all these different things to get on the management program. And this was one of the retailers at the time. And I would see people coming from university come in, for a couple of months, get the position, and then I would end up training them. And I was with this organization for ages. And because I subsequently left school with no qualifications, because I, undiagnosed dyslexia and ADHD, it was really like I was doing the job, but didn't have the title and I didn't have the pay packet that went with it. And then I moved around loads of different jobs and worked my way up to regional director for a different retailer. But it's interesting, isn't it, that sometimes these rules and regulations that are put in place of you need to be a year, you need to do this. And don't get me wrong, I understand that the
rules are good. I do, and I think that again, when you look at all the memes and all this kind of thing with ADHD and all it, a lot of them do, we all sort of laugh at them. I like rules if I can see the point in them. If I can't see the point in it, I ain't going to follow it. Yeah, it's just not going to happen. But I do like rules because and I like grey areas as well. They're good, but if I can see a rule and I see that it's there for a reason, I want everyone to adhere to it. But in that case, like with yours, if you can do that job and you're training other people to do that job, what's the, what, but I think a lot of that comes down to, and again, a lot of what I do with my training, although I train people to teach, there's a lot of, and I talked about this week because they already do the job, about how management, a lot of managers come on and say, oh my gosh, a lot of our managers could come on that course, because a lot of what I do about the psychology, because that's what my degree was. And so for me, it's about that psychology, and it's about, with training, is that I believe that I see a lot about mental health. I lost my dad through suicide, and I feel very strongly about this, but I see that we can keep talking about that sort of stuff, and we can keep in the workplace. But actually, if we don't understand how to work with people, and we get back to Maslow, if we don't understand what makes people tick, what people need, what people are struggling with, whether it's learning or working, then there's always going to be a problem, and you're going to have people that aren't going to be motivated to work, and they're not going to succeed in the end. So ultimately, in the end, they're going to leave, or there's going to be problems with them, which of course, I do neurodiversity training for managers and stuff, which strangely there's not massive uptake on. I think it's become more trendy now, and yet I get my Access to Work grant, which I'm very fortunate to have got, but I'm asked to go and get coaching that will make me be fitting into a workplace. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. How about maybe the workplace trains people to try and understand people like me? But actually, when you start looking at people like me, when you look at the things I need, they're things that would benefit most people. Bullet points. Why aren't things bullet points? Don't give me an essay with a list of things. Give me some bullet points. And yet you ask most people and they'd say, yeah, that would really help me too. So I just think that the whole of it's all of this is about the psychology of it all. And I think it doesn't matter if you're neurodiverse. I get people that are in my groups and I say, I care about if somebody's got a diagnosis of whatever, or they've got a physical disability, but I actually care about everyone in that room, because I had 45 years of not knowing that I had what I've got. And yet I taught somebody a while ago who's probably late 50s, and he still now says to me, George, that's you I'm talking about. He now says to me that nobody had ever recognised him. He'd not done well at school. I think he'd gone to prison, and he came into that room and he said, you're the first person that's ever believed in me. And that's massive. And I said, but everybody believed to be believed in. Everybody should be. And, I struggle. I've worked in the school system and I struggle with it because so many people, my son included, just don't get seen. And I don't think it's the teacher's fault. I think sometimes it can be. I think it's the system's fault. And then ultimately, because people aren't being diagnosed then, of course, then they're coming through to adulthood, and you just think, what a waste. My son, he's doing his GCSEs and he's still waiting to get a number dyscalculia, a diagnosis. And why can't he? Because the county council don't have an ed psych that assesses for it. I said, well, you can't, and I'm taking this further, because they said, oh, well, we'll just get him through his GCSEs. And I said, but he's now panicking, he won't pass them. And they said, but then he can get help at college or when he's older. And I said, but that's really sad. He's got music and he loves music, thankfully. But how sad that young people have to feel so rubbish about themselves. Like Sam Thompson, is it? That was on I'm a Celebrity. He said last night, and I read it, and it said something like, I wish I'd known, because I wouldn't have felt so crap about myself all my life. And I thought, wow, I could have written that, which so many people, you probably included. How sad.
Do you think do you think this kind of sets up the feelings, doesn't it, from an educational point of view? If we're feeling this burden that we don't fit into society, or in that sense, or we're not good enough, and all these different things, which is wrong in any way, shape, or form. But again, society is a little, things fitting in is difficult in any way, shape, or form, as we've discussed this. But then we go into college and university, and then the workplace. And as we, you've mentioned in the workplace, do you think there is enough support out there for wellness for mental wellness in the workplace?
I think, oddly, I'm going out somewhere next week to do mental health first aid, and it's not, this is going to sound odd, it's not something I necessarily agree with, having these mental health first aiders, because I think it brings it sort of almost encourages this idea that we can put a sticking plaster over things, which is literally not what we can do. I mean, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety all my life. It wasn't that at all. It was living with this. But so when I go out and do that, though, I do it in a different, it's more about trying to, nobody's going to be a first aider in that. It's more about awareness than anything. And I think it's about people having awareness about their own stuff, whatever that stuff is, and just being able to be open. And I think, again, I keep bringing it back to it, that when I do the training, remember I had a group of, there was 13 blokes I was teaching, and we were in a very small room and they were all really close to each other. I thought, I don't feel comfortable with this at all. And they don't know each other, but by the end of it, by me opening up about my stuff, they do. And then I said, you're speaking up in here. This is what you need to take back to your workplace. And some of them will say, but that's not what we do, particularly the construction industry. That's not what we do. You don't talk about that stuff. I said, well, then you be the one that starts it then. I said, because if you don't start it, who's going to? Maybe management might, but depends what their idea of it is. And so I honestly believe that's where it starts. We can send people on course after course after course, but actually, if we don't have that culture change, that if you start changing with that training, so when people start to be able to say that unsaid, it's okay to be whatever, it won't happen overnight. But if you have that culture in that workplace, in that sector, in that industry, then it becomes a thing rather than just a 1 week a year thing and 1 day a year.
I'm literally thinking exactly the same within this. If we looked at kind of dyslexia, for instance, October is a really big deal for dyslexia. I want to say really big deal in the sense that people get really on board. For the month of October, everyone's kind of for the start of October anyway. Companies are going, oh, can we? I get inundated with people asking me if I can go and do a talk at in workplaces and different things, which is great. It's humbling. It's amazing. But the question I always ask is okay. So if I'm coming in and doing a talk, what are you doing after that? Yeah. And then it's a case of what, because you can imagine with the incredible work that you're doing, it's almost like opening Pandora's box in the sense of, okay, so if we're going to start these conversations with people, where are they going to go next? Because if you're evoking those feelings and you're making them say, oh, actually, you can talk about this, and then you go back into a working environment where no one else is really getting involved in this, you've just sent 5 people to this thing or 10 people to this thing. That's the problem. So it's looking at the longevity of something, isn't it? Yeah.
It's the education of it. It's not, I think there's that sort of training. And again, Graham and I are doing something soon. It's about training. It's not just training people, it's about educating people, because I think that's that thing. It's a tick box training, isn't it? It's, if we just say they've been on that course, but actually that's not really about what it is. I've never wanted to make money out of the fact, like suicide, like I said, I lost my dad. And oddly, people think I talk about it all the time, and I don't. I talk about it as I'm going to a conference next week, just because I'm involved in, I run a retreat. But it's about me trying to use what I went through to be able to help other people. But equally, it's not just a 1 day of the year thing. It's an actual mindset change. So even like for me, when I go and speak to people that have lost people, I just mean at the group I go to, and I say to them, don't try and think about what if, because that's not going to help. Try and think about what you can change for other people, let's just say. And I think that's what I try to bring about from people, whether it's in my own life or whether it's my training or whatever it is that, it's just about people really, really looking at themselves. I'm back to that again. It's just about people really looking at themselves and not trying to please other people all the time. I mean, gosh, I've done it all my life, and still at times there's some things I can't get out of, that where I have to, and sometimes people have to with their family, but that people pleasing doesn't help, and that's what gets back into the workplaces. I think it's about people, and the other thing is that if people just accepted that sometimes we're not going to agree with other people, and that, you know, that person's different than that person, but just try and understand and just see things from other people's point of view. And if you can't, don't say anything.
There's power in not saying anything, isn't there?
Somebody said on my training once, and I can't swear on here, obviously, but someone said, we were talking about equality and diversity and what you could do to, and I said, and someone said to me, do you know what, if people stop being such, and it begins with D, the world, and I thought, that's it. If people would just climb down from where they are, not try and be right all the time, except I am right all the time. If they did, then actually everything would just be so much better.
Do you think because we've got our own agendas sometimes, or people's got their own agendas, and they're almost steamrolling in this, and it's kind of, you know, my way or the highway, so to speak, and
yeah.
You know, and that then, you know, creates that environment, doesn't it? Well, actually, this was my plan. This is, you know, has to go to this way, and if someone interjects with this, or they don't go along with it, it can evoke that emotion. You think, well, why are they, you know, like you take offense.
I think oddly, I used to, like, I joke there about always being right, because I do joke about it, because I will only ever speak up if I don't like being wrong. I hate it. So if I know I'm right, I am right. And I think people that are neurodiverse quite often get frustrated with the world when we can see the problem and we can see what we need to do to change it, but everybody's turning a blind eye because we don't, like, we can't possibly go against what either the workplace says or society, and we're in the corner, often then not being able to articulate ourselves particularly well because we get frustrated. And so for me, I've taught myself now to take a step back from it, because I know that I'm not going to get heard. So I find ways of being heard so that I can do that disruption, but in a, you know, I'll say backdoor way. But yeah, I think a lot of the time it is that there's agendas out there and people get quite annoyed if you don't go along with that agenda. But I will, and that's why I made this myself, because I was always seen as a pain in the neck or somebody that was mouthy or whatever. And I'm like, no, it's because you didn't like what you were hearing. I fell out with my son's head teacher at his school, and I said she wouldn't come to a meeting with me. And I said, and I thought, but it's because she didn't like what to me, if I will sit there and I will have a conversation with somebody, but if you won't come and sit with me, why won't you come and sit with me? Because I'm more than, if I can, you know, if somebody can explain to me, then yeah, I'll take that on board. But I think this is so often in the workplace that you get people that have got a certain idea how they want it done, and it often higher up, and it's very hard then. And that's why with that training, I try to get people. I just this morning got an email from somebody that works for the MOD, and they were saying that their training has to be done a certain way and they can't change things. And I said, but if the information's not right in that training, it needs to be changed. And so he'd come back to me and said that I said, you need to go back. And he did. And they've actually changed things much higher up now. That before it was that they had to keep putting out the same information. And I said, but if that information's not right, so he went back, and I feel proud, because that then starts people thinking about, don't go along with things if it's not right and if it doesn't feel right.
It's interesting, isn't it, how many times an organization sits and we look at marketing, we look at sales, and we look at, you know, all of these different things, and then it's interesting to think, well, how do we increase our wellness around and education around our people? How do we help and support our people? And then going into their actual training side of it, you know, into their, you know, their handbooks or whatever it is that they need to do to update something, to actually start installing different things into them. Because
it's hard. It's with the Care Connector network that me and Ian have run. That is about change. It's about bringing the care providers and the care suppliers together. But a lot of it is about changing things, because things aren't in a good way in the social care sector. It's not. But something has to change. But we go to, you know, we're partners at care shows, and we're trying to change things, even the way that that we're giving suggestions about changing things, because the care sector are over here saying, oh God, everything's awful, and you've got the suppliers sort of wanting to try and change things, and nothing's happening. And I spoke at one of the care shows, and I was saying about, you know, train the trainers, and sort of saying about how the ones that are unaccredited, that the care sector buy into them. I say, don't. It's costing you a lot of money, but people just go along with it, you know, and it is really difficult to try and change things. And it's like, where do you? But I honestly believe that it's with that, it is with effective. And I say the word effective because there's a lot of training out there. Which is why when I train people to train, people can deliver training without knowing how to do it. But like the people I had this week said, you've really opened my eyes. They'd already been doing it, but they said, I understand why we do this or how we can change that. And like I said, you think management is it? I don't think it is. Well, it can be, depending on how those managers have been trained. But if you've got a toxic management, or you've got management that aren't well trained or don't think about the psychology behind what they're doing with their employees, you've got a problem.
I think you're absolutely spot on all of those comments and statements. I find it very interesting that, you know, being in the corporate sector for many years in the past, in different roles and very sort of senior roles and very you know everyday roles or whatever it is. I don't go with hierarchy and that kind of thing. You know, and labels. You know, but I always think to myself, when someone's taken on for a position, it's almost like, do they have the skills to do the job? Okay, can they motivate a team? Can they sell? Can they do? But I think now it should really go deeper, and you should be continuously reevaluating your job, or the organization should be reevaluating your job in the best way of how to support that manager to grow within the organization. But sometimes it's almost, you're the manager, you manage your team, and it's almost like you'll develop the team but without developing yourself. And you'll find sometimes, if you're in an organization for 3, 4, 5 years, that you think, well, actually, when was the last time I went on a course? Or when was the last time I was developed or trained in this and this? But you're pushing your team. You know, a good manager would push their team. So it's sometimes within an organization, even when you get up that tier or whatever it is, that sometimes it stops, because instead of training and supporting, it's just expectation.
It is that it depends what management is seen as, isn't it? It's like managing, because it depends on, I've seen some good managers, I've seen some less good ones, and somebody I know who manages their team manages them in a way that is about really nurturing them and actually about leading. They are an actual leader, that they they said to me a while ago that we're trying to nurture their team, and somebody, I'm doing some training for their team actually, and they said, actually, I really want you to come in because it's sales. They work in sales and they work in IT. And he said, I actually really think that because they do train people, because they train people to use the things that they sell. Yeah. And that's a really big thing that doesn't get seen. And he said, I really think that would be beneficial for them, but for them to do their job well in terms of money, in terms of them bringing sales in. And I said, but what you will see, and he said, I know what I am going to see, is that they as people and they as a team they'll be much better, because they'll understand themselves. And like you said, if those managers, if you're fortunate to have a manager that is very self-aware and those kind of things, but if they're a manager that's been taken on, that's a manager to tell people what to do, because that's why some people want to be a manager, then that's difficult, because I think that's when you don't get a very happy team. It's when somebody's a leader that actually says, do you know what? I'm going to let you do that because you're really good at that.
Because it becomes really counterproductive, doesn't it? And actually that person who is managing that way, maybe the organization wants them to manage that way, or maybe that's the type of management style that they like. But it is counterproductive, because counterintuitive, because you have a high labor turnover of members of staff that wouldn't want to work in an organization. You have an organization based on stress or, not being able to want to speak up and not wanting to make a mistake. And if they do, they'll just leave. And it just brings this autonomy of all this pressure on all sides. So it's
starting to change. I think unfortunately things have to get trendy, and I don't like trends. I think things have to get trendy for an organisation to, it's a bit like with that mental health first aid thing, isn't it? It's a bit like any of these things. It's not like restaurants even, you know, when you had, I don't know, restaurants that might want to make changes, but all of a sudden it's like, yeah, let's lower the amount of sugar, or salt, and then it all becomes trendy, and even, you know, using recycling and stuff like that becomes the trendy thing to do now, which it's great. And I think that, yeah, I think now it's starting to change, that if an organisation sees that happy organisation, I think I just don't like it on LinkedIn and stuff like that, when you see that it all becomes a bit cliche and a bit, I hope though that the reality behind it is that it's real, not just for the camera, because that makes me feel a bit about it, really.
And that's, and you're absolutely right, isn't it? And you have to think, is there a substance behind this, or is it a case of we've just had someone come in to do some work, and now we want to shout about it to say that we're a great, you know, organization, and then nothing happens.
You can tick that box. Yeah, get that stamp of approval.
Yeah. So, Marianne, we are coming up to the end of our talk, and honestly, it's been phenomenal speaking to yourself, Marianne. If people want to get in touch with yourself, you know, in contact with yourself in the organisation that you run, how can people do that? Could you tell us?
My email address is hello@2mtraining.co.uk, and I'm on LinkedIn as well, Marianne Mills. I've got hello on there instead of Marianne because people don't spell it correctly. But yeah, you can contact me on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, and on my website, and then you can just have a chat with me about anything. I like chatting about stuff. Well, I do training, obviously.
You don't just do training, you do incredible training. So honestly, Marianne, it's been phenomenal speaking to yourself. We've covered loads of different topics, and I can't thank you enough. And like I said,
on it as well now again.
Marianne, have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much for being a guest on our show, and we will catch up with you very soon.
Thank you very much.